Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about what my friends and I got wrong about Mattel's Masters of the Universe action figure line. Unlike G.I. Joe and Star Wars, where I had a tough time picking out my first few figures, Masters of the Universe offered a very simple choice for me. He-Man and Skeletor were such obvious characters for my first two figures that I spent absolutely no time at all picking out those two at the toy store when I first saw the Masters of the Universe line in 1982. Of course, when I first saw the Masters of the Universe figures, only four were available: He-Man, Skeletor, Beastman, and Man-at-Arms. I eventually ended up with a Man-at-Arms figure, but as a kid, I never had Beastman. The next four figures, Teela, Stratos, Zodak, and Merman, didn't arrive in stores until the second half of 1982. And when they did, Mattel had bigger plans for Teela than my friends and I ever understood. When they first came out, the vintage Teela action figure was supposed to be two different characters, both Teela the Warrior and also the Goddess, originally called the Sorceress, who protected the Power Sword and the magic of Castle Grayskull. Kids were supposed to take off the snake headdress and the figure would be Teela, or put the headdress back on and the character would be the Goddess. I never picked up on that as a kid at all. Maybe it's just because I wasn't very bright, or maybe it's because Mattel wasn't very clear about what was going on at the time. In Mattel's earliest version of their plan for the first wave, there actually would have been two different female figures among the first 8. Early concept art shows Teela looking like the figure that we got without the snake armor, but the Goddess, who at the time was called the Sorceress, appears to come from the same mold, except maybe the head, but molded in light green with darker green accents. And this character did have the snake armor. When Wave 2 came out, Evil-Lyn was the same mold as Teela, but with a different head sculpt, so they did end up using this idea later on. Anyway, at the last minute, Mattel got cold feet about having a second female figure because at the time, there was a strong belief in the boys' toys industry that female figures just didn't sell very well. So they scrapped the second female character, replacing it with Zodak, and instead planned for the single Teela figure to be both of the two different characters. I've read that one clue to this fact, which wasn't much of a clue, was that the Teela package listed her as Teela, Warrior Goddess. To me, it just sounded like there was a character named Teela who was both a warrior and a goddess. Apparently, we were supposed to get that it was two different characters, I guess. Ideally, Mattel wanted kids to buy two Teela figures, and they were supposed to take the snake headdress off of one of the figures so that it would be Teela and leave the headdress on for the other figure, and that one would be the Goddess character. So was that the only clue? Not really. All the way back in 1982, DC released a Masters of the Universe 3-part miniseries comic book to help introduce the public to this brand new world of characters. And in that comic book, Teela is dressed in an odd metal bikini with long flowing blondish hair. You could argue that it's strawberry. It's definitely not as yellow as He-Man's hair. But we also see Teela right there on the cover of the comic, dressed pretty much just like the action figure. In this first issue of the comic, the Goddess, pictured here, and Teela were two different characters. In fact, Teela helps He-Man rescue the Goddess, and then, starting in issue 2, Teela wears the Goddess's outfit? So the person on the cover of issue 1 could have been the Goddess. Anyway, this one issue of the DC Masters of the Universe miniseries is where we should have figured out that the Teela figure was two different characters, I guess. By the way, a figure in a metal bikini outfit was later released for the Classics line. Was she called Teela or the Goddess? Neither one. She was called Battleground Teela. By the time the Filmation cartoon showed up on TV, it seemed like the sorceress was an entirely new character that didn't have an action figure. She would be released as an action figure near the end of the line with a completely different sculpt from Teela. So I guess Mattel gave up on trying to sell us the same figure twice, to be used as two different characters. But my friends and I never understood that plan anyway. Despite the fact that Teela was typically shown in the cartoons and comics without the snake armor, I've always thought it was a really cool piece. The Teela head sculpt was also quite a bit nicer than the majority of the female head sculpt for the smaller 3 3/4 inch figures that were out at the time. Overall, Teela was about as close as you could get to a female fantasy art action figure in the early 1980s, and I think the figure and the character hold up pretty well. Did you have a Teela figure as a kid? If so, was there ever a point that you thought she was supposed to be two different characters in one figure? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you have a chance, it would be great if you would share it on social media. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell. As always, thanks for watching.